If you're interested in the story behind the business headlines, check out Big Technology Podcast, my weekly show that features in-depth interviews with CEOs, researchers, and reformers in business and technology. Hi, I'm Alex Kantrowitz. I'm a longtime journalist, CNBC contributor, and the host of the show. I empty my Rolodex every Wednesday to bring you awesome episodes, so go check out Big Technology Podcast. It's available on all podcast apps. Would love to have you as a listener.
From LinkedIn News, I'm Jessie Hempel, host of the Hello Monday podcast. Start your week with the Hello Monday podcast. We'll navigate career pivots. We'll learn where happiness fits in. Listen to Hello Monday with me, Jessie Hempel, on the LinkedIn Podcast Network or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to the American Negotiation Institute's podcast, where we will teach you the skills you need to get more out of life. And now your host, Kwame Christian.
Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of Negotiate Anything. I'm Kwame Christian. I'm a business lawyer and I am passionate about teaching business professionals like you the keys to negotiation and persuasion. This podcast is produced by the American Negotiation Institute, where we offer live negotiation trainings and one-on-one coaching for professionals that want to learn how to communicate confidently and persuasively. Negotiate Anything is sponsored by FreshBooks, a ridiculously easy-to-use cloud accounting software for small business owners that saves you time and gets you paid faster. It's used by over 10 million people worldwide, and because you're a listener, you can try it out for free. To get your 30-day trial, go to freshbooks.com/negotiate and enter Negotiate Anything in the How Did You Hear About It section. I've put a link in the description for easy access. Our guest today is Matt Bodnar. Matt was named to Forbes 30 Under 30 and is called a Rising Restaurateur Star by the National Restaurant Association. He's a partner at an early-stage investment firm called Fresh Hospitality, and he's also the co-founder of Fresh Capital, which focuses on commercial real estate investing and development. Matt is also the host of one of my favorite podcasts, The Science of Success. In this episode, Matt talks about some of the essential negotiation techniques that we need to know in order to be successful, and he shows us how they can be applied to our everyday business lives. I know you're going to get a lot out of this one, so without further ado, let's jump into the interview. So Matt, thanks for joining us today.
Well, it's an honor to be on here, Kwame. Thank you.
My pleasure. And for the audience, we were just chatting a little bit ago about how I discovered Matt's podcast, and I was blown away. I was nerding out on the topics a lot. And then his team reached out to me, 2 days later, and said, hey, Matt wants to be on the show. So it was perfect timing. So we're really glad to have you.
Well, I'm excited to be here. And as we were talking about before, negotiation is one of my favorite topics and something I spend a lot of time doing. So I'm excited to dive in.
Perfect. So how about you get us started by telling a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. So I am for my day job, I'm a partner at an investment firm called Fresh Hospitality that essentially invests kind of across the food value spectrum. So we invest in everything from farms to production plants to really the two biggest pieces of our portfolio are restaurants and commercial real estate sort of in and around the food world. And we also have a number of kind of other investments that are related and support a lot of what we do. And within that, one of my primary focuses is sourcing new deal opportunities, closing investments, and looking for things to invest in. So from that perspective, I'm constantly putting together transactions, joint ventures, partnerships, all kinds of different business arrangements that negotiation and plays a huge role. And having a negotiation kind of toolkit is really, really beneficial. The other sort of hobby or side project that I have that you just touched on a moment ago, I also am the creator and host of a podcast called The Science of Success, which is all about really the art of decision making and how to, it's kind of at the intersection of psychology and personal development and how you can learn to think better and more deeply understand reality.
I love it. That is so cool. So how did you get into such an interesting niche? How'd that start?
So out of school, I worked in New York on Wall Street for a number of years. And just through a connection that I had an opportunity I'm from Nashville originally, and that's where Fresh is based. I had an opportunity to come back to Nashville and get involved. And that was about 6 years ago, a little less than 6 years ago. And it's been great. It's been really, really fun.
Very cool. And tell us more about the podcast and what kind of things people can expect to learn from it, because my goal is to get as many of my people listening to your show because it adds so much value.
Well, I really appreciate that. Yeah. So the podcast, it started out, it's kind of funny. I call myself an accidental podcaster because I didn't really know anything about podcasting and I didn't set out to be a podcaster or to create a podcast. It started out because I'm an investor, first and foremost. And I really started, it sort of dawned on me at some point. I was like, hey, maybe I should study the most successful investor ever, AKA Warren Buffett. Right. And I was like, yeah, that sounds like a pretty good idea. And so I started basically reading everything that's ever been written by or about Buffett. And through that, really started digging into reading a lot about his business partner, a guy named Charlie Munger, who's an incredible thinker and really, really smart guy. And through that sort of rabbit hole, that started, I kind of got into psychology and I got really into what I call the art of decision making and how to build a toolkit of what Munger calls mental models to more deeply understand reality and to help kind of impact your thinking over the long term. The simplest way that I think about it is, focusing on improving your decision making is kind of like compound interest for your brain, in the sense that a 1% improvement in your ability to make better decisions or your ability to understand things more deeply impacts everything that you do, whether it's finding a new job, whether it's buying a new car, whether it's purchasing a house, whether it's getting a date with somebody, all of those different things. If you can cultivate a skill set of fundamental tools and negotiation, and the components of negotiation are absolutely parts of that, it continues to impact everything you do for the rest of your life. So it's a really, really high leverage thing to be focused on. And that's kind of how I got into it. But I got a little bit sidetracked there. The way that I ended up with the podcast is I'd had a bunch of what I would call basically just like kitchen table conversations with friends, fellow entrepreneurs about a lot of this stuff. And I ended up having a conversation with a friend of mine who at the time had a small science news website called redorbit.com. And he's since actually sold that website, and the podcast is no longer directly affiliated with them in any way. But at the time he's like, hey dude, let's take all this stuff that you're talking on and on about. Let's turn that into a podcast and we'll put it on my website. And I was like, okay, I don't know anything about podcasting, but sure. And we launched in the fall of 2015, and through about the end of the year, we had around 7,000 total downloads, which I was pretty excited about, having not really known what to expect. It was cool to kind of, launch something and have thousands of people downloading it and people from around the world and all that. But we really hit a huge kind of growth curve starting at the beginning of 2016. And to date, we have I think we have just over 780,000 downloads now, listeners in over 200 countries. And it's really taken off a lot more than I ever anticipated when we kind of started it as a little side project.
That is awesome, man. I'm so happy for you. I mean, but the thing is too, it's well earned because like I said, the content is incredibly high level. So kudos to you.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. And you actually answered one of my next questions because when I was looking through your background, I saw that your background is in poli-sci, and I see Mandarin as well. And I was surprised not to see psychology, but you answered it there. That's how you got into it with you said it was Munger, is his last name?
Yeah, Charlie Munger.
Fascinating. Out of curiosity, have you ever read the book Simple Rules?
No, I've never heard of it.
Yeah, it's a book. I read it a couple weeks ago or last week. Really, it's just about simplifying decision making and kind of taking a play off of the triage method that they use in medicine and kind of bringing that idea to other aspects of your life to make decision making easier in complex situations. I thought it was a really fun book, really simple, really. I guess that's it was meant to be that way, but it was almost similar to the Checklist Manifesto. Did you read that one?
Yeah. Tel Gawande, great book.
Yes. It was like a Checklist Manifesto Part 2. So maybe you should check it out. It's a fun one.
I'll add it to my reading list for sure.
Yeah, cool. So tell us about how you prepare for negotiations and just hearing more about the way that you see life. I'm really excited to see your mental approach to this.
Definitely. And I mean, before we dig into that, I think it's important, or I guess I kind of mentioned already, like I negotiate in some form or fashion almost on a daily basis, right? A huge component of my job is structuring transactions, structuring investments, kind of negotiating different financial terms and structures. And even when it goes into some of the various companies that we invest in, things like negotiating salary packages and benefits and all of these different components. I literally had a conversation earlier today where I was negotiating with somebody. And so before we get into kind of what my preparation methods are, which I think are super important, and one of the biggest takeaways, and I know you talk about a lot on the show, and I think they did a study at Harvard that like the single biggest thing that correlated with negotiating success was time spent preparing. So there's no question that preparation is an essential component. But I'd love to start with kind of like how do I think about negotiation? What are kind of the core components? And then that sort of feeds into how I prepare, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. No, I'm excited. And first of all, I am so excited because you know what you're talking about. You know what you're doing. So yeah, go on. I'm excited to see where this goes.
So there's a couple of things that I think about when I think about a negotiation or when I think about putting together a deal.
Hey you, I'm Andrew Seaman. Do you want a new job? Or do you want to move forward in your career? Well, you should listen to my weekly show called Get Hired with Andrew Seaman. We talk about it all, and it's waiting for you, yes you, wherever you get your podcasts.
Brace the rudders! Raise the sails! Raise the sails!
Captain, an unidentified ship is approaching. Over.
Roger. Wait, is that an enterprise sales solution?
Reach sales professionals, not professional sailors. With LinkedIn ads, you can target the right people by industry, job title, and more. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Get started today at linkedin.com/marketer. Terms and conditions apply.
The first is that, and this is something that I think a lot of people don't understand, whenever I think about a transaction, think about a negotiation, it's never, from my perspective, and people may have different sort of styles and different ways about this, but from my perspective, and when I approach any negotiation, I never try to manipulate somebody. I never try to sort of high pressure sales or bully somebody into conceding something. And I think that a lot of people, when they think about negotiation, they think that it's like all of this stuff about like trying to trick somebody and like, oh, I got you to agree to this XYZ thing. Like, that's not what it is at all. To me, the fundamental skill of negotiating goes back to the old analogy of, and I forget if it's George Washington or Abraham Lincoln, but something about, they were asked like, if you had 5 hours to chop down a tree, you know, what would you do? And they said, I'd spend the first 4 hours sharpening the axe, right? And the last hour chopping it down. And the fundamental thing about negotiation is I spend the vast majority of my time, like 90% of my time in any negotiation, seeking to understand what the other person wants. That's what I spend almost all of my energy on, is trying to understand what's their position, what do they want, what are they trying to achieve. And by doing that, once you have a really, really clear understanding of what the other party wants, and I'm assuming you kind of go into the negotiation with a deep understanding of what you want, and if you don't, you should also get really clear about that. To me, I just look at negotiation essentially as putting together sort of a Venn diagram of the overlapping needs and wants that each party has, and trying to, really the negotiation is about trying to kind of sort of share or demark that portion of the Venn diagram that overlaps. And a lot of people think that it's about like bullying or forcing someone into agreeing to something that's not good for them or that they wouldn't want to do. And from my perspective, that's absolutely not the case. And I think you should always try to approach a negotiation from the perspective of trying to create a win-win and trying to create something that satisfies the majority of the things that the person you're negotiating with wants to achieve.
I love it. This is so good. So can you give an example? Of course, you adjust things as necessary for confidentiality purposes, but of some of your negotiations where coming into it from a win-win perspective turned out to be beneficial, and where you were able to see that overlap in that Venn diagram?
Yeah, I'll give you kind of two contextual examples within the food industry, which is where I focus most of my time and energy. We look for a very particular type of entrepreneur to invest in. And our business model, to give you a little bit more to kind of contextualize this example, is we invest primarily in what's called the fast casual segment of the restaurant. We'll just go dive into the restaurant vertical specifically for this example. We invest primarily in the fast casual segment, and we look to invest in restaurant concepts that have a lot of growth potential. And we look to find entrepreneurs that have sort of reached their limit in terms of their ability to scale the business. We look for something that has a lot of traction, something that has success, customer adoption, and the founders basically sitting there thinking, oh man, I really wish I could build some more units. I really think this thing has the potential to be, a national brand. but I can't, figure out, I'm super busy, right? The restaurant business is incredibly demanding. And so they're scrambling all over the place. Their wife's doing the accounting, like all of these things. And it's very chaotic. We come in, invest in the company, and layer in all of our systems and processes to help them scale up and help them grow. And we really focus on what's called the back of the house in the restaurant business. We really focus on the technology, the accounting, the processes, the systems, the things that enable them to focus on why they got into the business in the first place. Things like the food, things like the guest experience, things like the brand. So to give you two examples, and this almost applies to the selection, even sort of before the negotiation takes place, there's a lot of really successful restaurants that the chef doesn't necessarily want to go and build this massive empire of restaurants, right? And we would, it wouldn't behoove us, and we don't go and track those guys down, even if they have a line around the block and they're killing it. We're not going to go knock on their door and be like, hey, you should really take this thing and blow it up and grow it. And it'd be great for you. And you could make a lot of money, and, you could go get a beach house and do all this stuff, and try to convince them that that's what they need to do, when they're sitting there thinking, no, I kind of like what I'm doing. And I like the sort of, the craftsmanship of this sort of single experience. And this is what I want to do. And I don't really care about building all this other stuff and building this empire and all these things. What we look for are the entrepreneurs that are saying, man, I really want to grow this thing, but I have no freaking idea how to do it. And what we do is come in and layer in all the systems that help them do that, right? And so from that perspective, I'm not trying to go find somebody that I have to convince to do a deal with me. I'm trying to, when I meet with somebody as a prospective investment, I spend all my time trying to understand, what do they really want? What are they trying to achieve? And if what they want doesn't align with what we do as a business or what we're looking to do when we invest in a company, then it's not really worth pursuing. Even if they have an amazing concept and I know that it could become something that's a national, really successful restaurant concept, I'm not going to waste my time or their time trying to pursue something that is sort of trying to convince them that it's a good idea. And there's a specific deal I'm thinking of that probably, 6 months ago was an amazing company, huge opportunity. And the founder kind of kept waffling back and forth between wanting to do it, not wanting to do it. And eventually we were like, look, if you're not 100% on board with this, we're just going to move on, because we have a ton of opportunities. And that gets into another point of negotiation, which is you should always create options for yourself, and you should always look for ways to create leverage. But we have enough other opportunities that we're never going to go all in and have to be totally committed on a single opportunity. Every opportunity, we should have enough wherewithal to be able to walk away and be totally fine and realize that we're only going to sort of pursue opportunities that we know can be win-win for both people.
I love it. And really what this exemplifies is the fact that there is no real beginning and end to a negotiation, because you're doing this work beforehand. That comes in with the preparation, but you're also vetting the people so heavily beforehand that if they are even able to make it to the negotiation table through the vetting process, you already know that there is a likelihood of synergy between you and that person. So a lot of those problems that people might run into at the table, you avoid those completely because of your preparation process and your ability to vet out people before they even make it to that stage.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's all about, you can almost think of it in the sense of like a sales funnel, right? It's all about selection at the front end of the funnel to be able to cultivate and really whittle down only to the people who are going to be a really good fit. And then the negotiation itself oftentimes is pretty simple.
Mm-hmm. And it goes right back to what you were saying with the axe example. Your goal is to make it as easy as possible through the preparation stage, so the actual negotiation is a little bit less painless.
Exactly.
Unless, of course, you're the tree in that metaphor.
Yep.
So tell us a little bit more about options, because I think that is something that's overlooked by a lot of people. So I don't want to gloss over that.
Yeah. I think one of the other fundamental components of negotiation is finding ways to create leverage, right? And that can take form or take shape in many different ways, but options is one of the most simple ways, right? You have to have the ability to walk away, right? And whoever's less willing to walk away is always the person who gets less out of the negotiation. And if you're kind of all in on negotiation, you open yourself up to the possibility of making a bad deal or getting exploited or just having it blow up because you almost come off sometimes as sort of too desperate. And so we're fortunate that we've cultivated over many years and kind of built up essentially sort of an inbound pipeline of deal flow and leads and investment opportunities that we essentially say no. Like, we have people constantly reaching out to us that want us to invest in their businesses, and we say no to 90% of the people, and occasionally we'll sort of, whittle down and find the select few people that would be a really good fit and meet with them. But even in that case, we're not going to make a deal that doesn't fit our terms, and we know exactly what makes sense for us, and we're not going to stretch on something. Even if it sounds exciting, we're not going to stretch ourselves out of what we know kind of the right strike zone is for a transaction, because we know that there's plenty of transactions, right? And this is something that, I don't know if you're a fan of Tim Ferriss, but one of my favorite Tim Ferriss quotes is, and this is kind of paraphrasing him a little bit, but it's opportunity is infinite, right? And you have to sort of understand that essentially you can create opportunities at will. What it's really about is selection and cultivating, the best opportunities and actually executing on those, right? It's easy to come up with lots and lots of ideas and lots of things you can do. What you have to do is really whittle down and only focus on the select few. But in a context specific to negotiation, right, it's all about the ability to walk away, right? You need to be courting. I mean, and it's very context dependent, depending on what you're going to do. But and this gets into the preparation process too. But like, you should be researching, like, if you're purchasing a car, you should be researching what a comparable vehicles cost. If you're looking for a new job, you should figure out what would your salary be if you were to go to, a competitor, or what's the average sort of pay rate for the position that you're looking for. You want to get as much data, as much research as you can, and research and data is a form of leverage, right? If you can say, hey, the market rate for this position is X and you're paying me, 60% of X, like, you need to give me a raise, or I can go to one of these other companies and get a new job. The flip side of that is if you're an employer and an employee comes to you and says, hey, I'm not making enough. And you say, well, actually, for the position that you're in, here's what the comparable salary ranges would be for a bunch of different places, or for a bunch of different sort of comparables. And you're actually being overpaid by like 25%, right? And so having data is a huge way to create leverage, but it's also kind of intertwined with creating options. The simplest way to think about it is, if you're, again, using just employment as something that everybody or most people deal with, if you're applying to one job and that's it, right, you're going to get worse terms and you're going to get a worse offer than if you apply to a job, or you've applied to 10 jobs and 2 or 3 of them give you an offer, and you could say, hey, this offer sounds really good, but I just wanted to let you know that the guy down the street's offering me $10,000 more a year and more vacation time and XYZ, but I really want to work with your company. Is there anything you can do? And you might get some kind of concessions from them, whether it's more salary or more flexibility or whatever you want to get out of that negotiation. Having optionality and cultivating those different options is a great way to kind of create impartiality in yourself about, like, look, this sounds great, but the reality is I'm not going to do this because I've got better options.
Right. And I will also say, bonus points for you, because you dropped the reference to Tim Ferriss, one of my favorite authors in the business world too. So you're the first person on the podcast to refer to Tim. So I'm excited about that.
Big bonus points. Yeah, I'm a huge Tim Ferriss fan.
Yeah. So for the listeners out there who don't know Tim Ferriss, check out his work, especially the 4-Hour Work Week. That's like the Bible of our generation of entrepreneurs, really.
Pretty much.
Very nice. Yeah. And you covered it perfectly. You are only as strong as your best alternative. And
exactly.
You also mentioned too the willingness to walk away. And can you talk about your perspective on bluffing? Like, let's say, oh, I have a deal and the terms aren't exactly where I want, but I'm going to fake like I'm going to walk away. What is your opinion on that?
I think in certain situations it's beneficial to bluff, and I think it's a calculated decision, right? Bluffing really comes from, it's a way to sort of manufacture leverage when you don't actually have any. And it's high risk, high reward, in the sense that if you're not able to generate additional leverage, you can try to bluff that you have leverage, and there's an X percent of the time it's going to work out, but there's also percent of the time where your bluff gets called, and then you're basically dead in the water.
Right.
And so it's definitely a calculated risk. But if you're in a situation and sometimes you are in a negotiation where you don't have any flexibility and you need to try and do something to move the needle or something to make something happen, I think, in some of those instances you have to bluff. And I'm the poker player, and this analogy probably will ring true for anyone else who plays poker. Even when you're bluffing, you want to try and make what's called in poker a semi-bluff, right? And a semi-bluff is like, and I'll try to make this as simple as possible for people who don't play poker, but basically a pure bluff is when you bluff and you have a terrible hand, right? Like you have a hand that has no chance of winning. So you take it to, let's say, 10% chance of winning if there's a 10% chance they'll fold or whatever it might be. That's just a pure bluff. A semi bluff is where you take a hand that has a chance to pan out. Let's say you have a draw of some kind. So there are cards that you can hit that your hand will actually become the best hand. But let's say there's only like a 20 or 30% chance that you'll hit that draw. You semi bluff, which means you bet like you have a made hand already, and you win the pot two ways. You can either win it when they fold, or you can win it if your semi bluff actually hits and you hit your draw. Similarly, bluffing in negotiation, if like you want your bluffs to have some kind of material support, right? Like if you're trying to sell your company to somebody and you have, you only have one buyer, you want to try and cultivate multiple suitors, ideally, to start a bidding war to get the best possible terms, all this stuff. If you're in a really desperate situation and you only have one bidder, you might have a guy who you're talking to that hasn't given you a term sheet, hasn't given you a firm offer, but you can say, look, I've got another party that's really interested. I can't tell you too much about, what they've said to me because I'm under confidentiality, but, I really need you to get me an offer by the end of this week because the other party is very interested, right? And the reality is maybe they're interested, maybe they're not, and they may never give you an offer, may never give you anything, but there's a chance that it pans out and that other party actually does give you a term sheet, which you can then say, look, I've got another deal. Sorry, I'm going to move forward with that. Or there's a chance that they just go away and then you're kind of jammed if the other people are like, yeah, that's fine, we're not that interested, you can go with the other party, and then you've got no suitors anymore.
Right. And I'm glad you brought up that distinction between a bluff and a semi-bluff, because I think that is a really nuanced approach. Because people who just go out and bluff, I describe it almost like the negotiator's version of a Hail Mary. In football, the reason why we don't throw Hail Marys all the time is because it's risky.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
But that's a key distinction, the semi-bluff. And it's a safer option than just kind of making these big performances when there's really no substance behind it. One thing that I tell the listeners, I told them earlier, it's like, oh my gosh, almost a year ago, that's crazy. Make the distinction between a bluff and a warning, where imagine if you're driving up to a cliff and you see a sign that says, don't proceed, you'll fall off this cliff. The sign isn't bluffing, that's a warning. So it's like alerting people of the natural consequences of their actions. So it's like, if you do this, then this will happen. And so warnings, there's little risk in warning. If you are that person where it's like, listen, you're way beyond my number, I can't do that. If that's where you are, we're going to have to walk away. That's different. And so that's not what we're talking about here. The bluffing is like, there's a little bit of uncertainty behind what you're saying.
And another component of this, and this ties into a little bit to bluffing, but it's also sort of another way to manufacture leverage if you don't have a lot of leverage in a negotiation, is to remove yourself as the decision maker. And by that I mean, and it's always possible to sort of create a straw man in the negotiation that sort of gets the final say, right? So if you're married and you're thinking about buying a car, it can be your spouse. If you're the CEO of a company and you're thinking, well, there's nobody that can be the straw man, the board of directors can be the straw man, right? Or your business partners can be the straw man. There's always somebody that you can sort of take it back to and say, look, my board is being extremely hardline about this. They're only going to accept X, Y, Z. I know it's ridiculous, right? And this kind of you become sort of the reasonable party that's on their side. And you're like, look, I totally get it. Like, I understand you guys only want to spend X, or I totally see like where you're coming from. It makes a lot of sense. I'm just letting you know, like, my business partners, they're not going to go for that. Like, they're being really unreasonable. I totally agree. I'm just the messenger here, and I'm telling you that's not going to work. I can take what you're giving me and kind of shop it back to them, but it's probably going to come back, torn to pieces. And so when you remove yourself from, like, if you're actually at the negotiating table, you never want to be the person that's making, quote unquote, the final decision, right? You want to be sort of the communicator and say, I've got to run that up the flagpole. I've got to make sure that XYZ person or group of people is okay with that. And so it's kind of a double-edged thing. And one, you can become the ally, you become the reasonable party. And two, you never hard commit to anything that you may want to back out of later, right? So if there's a term that you're sort of unsure about in the deal, you can say, yeah, I think that makes sense. And to me, it makes sense. But I need to take it to my board and I need to see what they will think about it. And I just want to let you know, like, I think it makes sense, but they might come back and say, it's ridiculous. And so that gives you the ability to sort of step away and, come back. And the next time you have a conversation, you can be like, even if you never even talk to your board, right? Like, you can be like, yeah, I decided it's a terrible idea. And then you can come back and say, look, my board was they just couldn't get on board with this particular piece of the deal. But I like you guys. I really still want to put something together. Is there any way we can work around it?
I love it. And did you have Chris Voss on your show before?
Yes. Yeah. I've had Chris. Yeah.
He was on our show too. And so
he's the man.
Oh, he's amazing. Everybody keeps asking, can you have Chris back on?
Yeah, he's awesome.
Yeah. He, in his book, Never Split the Difference, he mentioned that the best negotiators are the ones who seem like they have the least amount of power at the table. And then he took it to the next level and said, if somebody is kind of playing that same kind of hard to get, really tough to nail down type of a game with you, you can kind of get at their ego by implying that they don't have a lot of power. And usually when you do that to people, their ego will make them step up and say, no, I do have the power. And it kind of puts them back as the decision maker at the table. So it puts them in a tough position because now they can actually commit. And so that's a kind of the reverse angle of that. So you want to make people feel as though you don't have as much power. You need to go back and check. But if somebody's doing that same thing to you, you can subtly say something that plays at their ego saying, oh, I understand you don't have that kind of authority in your company. And they're like,
exactly. Yeah.
What?
It's like, oh, should we be meeting with your boss instead? Is that the right person? Or, I thought you had the authority to be able to do this.
Yeah. And then hopefully after that, they're like, oh, I have the authority. We're buying this right now.
One of my favorite Chris Voss quotes, and I'm sure he mentioned it in your interview, but it ties back into the question you asked about bluffing too, which is, he says, never lie to anyone that you're not going to kill, right? And obviously as an FBI hostage negotiator, sometimes they were going to be literally killing people to get the hostages out. But it's really interesting when you think about it, and it basically boils down to, you don't need to lie to people to effectively negotiate. And I think that goes back to the whole idea of the kind of Venn diagram, right? It's all about creating win-win relationships and win-win transactions. It's not about manipulating people. It's about really deeply understanding them and figuring out, is there a way to align what they want and what you want in kind of a win-win scenario?
Right. And even taking that a little step further, too, if you lie to somebody and then they catch you in that lie, you have lost all credibility with that person. And not only that, people talk. And that gets out in the workplace, in the marketplace. Now you've lost credibility with that community. And so when people talk to me and they ask about lying and deception in negotiation, I can honestly say that I've never lied, not because I am the epitome of morality here, but just because I want to be good at what I do. I'm not willing to take that risk because, again, it's high risk, high reward. It's just ultimately not worth it. And then thinking back to your Venn diagram example, which I think is a brilliant way to visualize this, I look at negotiation as the art of deal discovery, not the art of deal making. You can't force it if it's not there.
Yeah, that's 100% agree with that.
Awesome. So let's talk about the preparation. Let's nerd out on this a little bit, because you talked about how you vet the people before we even get to the negotiation stage. Now, let's say somebody has made it through that vetting process. What does it look like when you're preparing for that actual conversation?
And I think we've sort of, in a roundabout way through this conversation, hit a lot of the points that I think are critical in the preparation phase, right? Like one of them that I touched on is you want to do a lot of research, right? Data is an incredible sort of impartial arbiter in any negotiation, and getting comparable data, getting things, like if we're talking about cars, getting the price of other vehicles or prices from other dealerships, or looking at what it would cost to buy it online, all of these different things, similar in a salary negotiation, getting the comparable salary ranges, all of that stuff, like doing a bunch of research and getting as much data as you can that supports your argument and kind of supports your position is a critical component of preparing for any negotiation. Another component, which we talked about, is kind of the whittling things down and really sort of before you even get to the negotiation, doing as much preparation to determine and kind of find people that you're going to be negotiating with that are the right people. And that eliminates the need to do a lot of unnecessary prep, because if you filter down and kind of whittle down, you already have pre-qualified the people you're meeting with to a huge degree, and it's a much more fruitful conversation. The other thing that you to me is a core component of preparation goes back to creating options, right? If you're looking to sell your company and you're negotiating with somebody, part of the preparation, I strongly believe, is to go and find and try to cultivate other opportunities so that in that negotiation you can say, look, I just wanted to be open with you guys. I've got, 4 other conversations going on and I can't tell you, where they are, but I just wanted to let you know that like, this isn't the only conversation we're having. Right. And that creates some kind of scarcity, that creates a little bit of time pressure, that creates kind of that, they're more interested in the opportunity. They know that somebody else might be able to take it. And so it kind of taps into a few of the different psychological biases and lets you, gives you leverage in the negotiation. So to me, the preparation phase is all about doing things so that you can generate leverage during the negotiation itself.
Right. Are there any specific tactics you enjoy using?
Yeah, I mean, to me, the one that we talked about a moment ago, removing yourself as the decision maker and kind of having a straw man that's outside of you that says yes or no, is a huge one. And the other one is just listening, right? Active listening, which is sort of a term of art that specifically describes, the process of really listening to what somebody's saying and kind of parroting, back what they say and inquiring and like digging in. I think that the single biggest thing missing from a lot of people's negotiation toolkit is a deep focus on understanding what the other person wants. And so to me, that's a huge component. Like I spend most conversations, I'll just keep asking like explanatory and discovery questions, just like, okay, tell me about this, tell me about this, tell me about what we want, tell me about it, boom. And it's like, okay, like now that I know all that stuff, it's really easy for me to see how a transaction might get pieced together.
Man, I wish you could see my face. It's just a big, huge smile. Because it's a perfect approach. Just perfect approach. It's almost, I've heard it described as investigatory negotiation, where you go in with curiosity, just asking questions and seeking understanding. And people would say, is that it? That's it? It's like, well, maybe not necessarily it, but it's about 90 to 95% of what it is, listening.
The funny thing is I use that approach for most things in my life. And it's really, any situation that seems complex or sort of unsolvable or whatever it might be, if you just keep digging in to where you can distill that situation or that problem or that opportunity down into the fundamental kind of building blocks, just the really simple components that underpin all the stuff that's going on, a lot of times it's almost self-evident to everyone in the conversation what the next step actually is, right? Or what needs to happen.
Yeah, and it's essentially, when you do it right, it turns almost into a brainstorming session of sorts, where you ask the questions and it turns into joint problem solving. It's like, okay, yeah, now we can both see where we should go. I think that's brilliant. And also, too, for the listeners, you can see how approaching it in this way takes a lot of pressure off of you, because you don't need to feel that pressure to force something. It just happens organically when you're curious in these conversations.
Yep, exactly.
Here on Negotiate Anything, we talk about how you can make difficult conversations easier. Well, our sponsor, FreshBooks, is all about making the dreaded day-to-day admin and paperwork easier for small business owners. FreshBooks has devoted over 14 years to transforming those feelings of dread into delight, and it's working. FreshBooks is a ridiculously easy-to-use cloud accounting software platform, and they've helped millions of people feel more organized, work smarter, and get paid faster. For example, you can fire off an invoice in less than 30 seconds, set up online payments in 2 clicks, and track expenses on the fly. And that's just a sample of what FreshBooks can do for you. And I will be honest with you, I was really skeptical at first, because I'm one of those entrepreneurs that hates accounting. But now, after getting the free trial, I was sold, and now I'm a user. FreshBooks is now offering an unrestricted free 30-day trial for all listeners of the podcast. And all you need to do is go to freshbooks.com/negotiate and enter Negotiate Anything in the How Did You Hear About It section. Check it out. They are a great company. Before we finish up this episode, I have a few questions for you. Does your job do professional development training? Are you looking for a workshop for your next conference? Does your profession require effective communication or dispute resolution? If so, a negotiation training seminar might be what you need. I've had the opportunity to do these trainings around the country, and I'd love to swing by your neck of the woods. Our customized negotiation seminars are as fun as they are informative. You'll not only discover the keys to negotiation and persuasion, you'll also have the opportunity to practice these skills in a safe environment with a negotiation simulation. And at the end of the seminar, you'll be able to communicate confidently, resolve disputes effectively, and get what you want out of your next negotiation. And as an added bonus, if you let us know far enough in advance, we can get these trainings certified for continuing education credits. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or shoot me an email to learn more. Now let's get back to the show. I could talk to you about this all day. This is this is cool, but we're coming up on time here. So I wanted to ask you this question. If you could challenge our audience to do one thing to make them better negotiators, what would it be?
I mean, I think it's just what we were talking about. Listen more, right? Focus on listening. And I would say, even outside of negotiation, I would say a lot of people get caught up in sort of the ego trap of not wanting to ask really simple questions because they're afraid to look dumb. I pretty much spend most of my conversations just asking really basic questions to people because I want to understand, like I was just saying, I want to understand all of the moving parts. I want to understand all of the really basic fundamentals of whatever is going on. And so I would say, ask dumb questions and ask simple questions and ask the questions you're afraid to ask and just listen. Focus on understanding what the other person wants and really, digging into what their needs are. And I think you'd be surprised how the answers sometimes just sort of fall out naturally when you do that.
Right. And this is something that you can do in everyday conversations. I had 2 meetings earlier today and I almost turned it into a game. These aren't negotiations. I'm just networking. And I would play this game where I would say, I want to see how little I can speak in this conversation and just ask questions and let the person go. And what is so interesting about this is that people would say, oh, Kwame, you're so smart. And it's like, I barely said anything.
Exactly.
This has happened multiple times where people I'm just meeting for the first time, they're like, I haven't told anybody this, but this is my breakthrough business idea. And what's crazy is that just because you're doing what so few people take the time to do, which is listen, it generates instant trust. And so they feel comfortable telling you things, even if it might be compromising, just because you listened.
I totally agree. And I'll throw this other little tidbit in as well. Silence can actually be an incredible sort of weapon in negotiation. And a lot of times, if somebody sort of ends their sentence and you just keep silent and just keep looking at them, there will be this sort of intermittent awkward pause, and then they will feel the need to keep talking to fill the pause. And a lot of times information will just start to kind of spill out, and they'll keep, they'll explain more of their position or kind of give something away or like tell you more than you thought. And you don't have to say anything. Like you can just be silent and just wait for them to get uncomfortable with the silence and then fill it with something.
Right. This is so much fun. Oh my goodness. I should have you back on sometime again to go deeper in this because this was too much fun for me. I'm hoping the audience had as much fun as we did.
Yeah, this was awesome. It's been an amazing conversation.
Likewise. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Matt. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Kwame. It's been an honor to be here and I really enjoyed talking with you.
I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you're finding this information helpful, please leave a review and subscribe. My goal is to teach these skills to as many people as possible, and leaving a review helps our search results, which helps us to reach more people. And remember, negotiation is where persuasion and problem solving meet. So if you ever have any questions or need help with specific situations, feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to help. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a great week, and I'll catch you in the next one.